Imagine this. You're enjoying a peaceful Saturday morning, sipping hot coffee on your porch, when suddenly three strangers in dark uniforms storm up your driveway, claiming they're with the HOA and ordering you to leave your own house. Immediately. That shocking scenario wasn't fiction for David Johnson. It was his reality. David had lived in his quiet suburban neighborhood for nearly 12 years. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, he was simply steady. His house was modest, painted a warm cream with blue shutters that his late wife had chosen before her passing. In the front yard grew a carefully tended flower bed that David watered every morning, a small act that gave him peace. His porch swing creaked softly when he sat there, watching the sun rise before starting his day. On that particular morning, everything seemed calm. The birds chirped. A few kids rode their bikes past his yard. Neighbors were trimming hedges or carrying groceries into their homes. David leaned back with his coffee cup, breathing in the comfort of routine. For him, this was home. It wasn't just wood and brick. It was where he had built his life, raised his daughter, and made countless memories. But tranquility has a way of breaking suddenly. Three men appeared at the end of his driveway. At first, David thought they were delivery workers or maybe contractors headed to the wrong address. However, as they drew closer, he noticed something unusual. They wore dark uniforms, black shirts, black cargo pants, boots polished to a shine. Clipboards were tucked under their arms, and one of them carried a folded paper like it were an official document. Without hesitation, the tallest man stepped onto David's porch. He didn't knock, didn't greet, didn't even smile. Instead, his voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Sir, you violate community standards. We're here to evict you." The words made David blink in shock. Evict him? From his own house? That wasn't just unlikely. It was absurd. His mortgage had been paid off years ago. His HOA fees were always on time. He hadn't received a single warning, fine, or complaint. Nothing about their statement made sense. David stood slowly, coffee cup trembling slightly in his hand. "Excuse me? Evict me?" There must be some mistake. But the men didn't budge. Another stepped forward, waving the folded document in his face. "We don't make mistakes. You're ordered to vacate immediately. Hand over your keys." The paper looked wrong from the start. It was thin, cheap, and missing any official seal. The text was vague, with no clear header, no legal signatures, and no case number. To David, it was nothing more than a piece of printed nonsense. Still, the men acted as if it were gospel truth. One of them tapped his belt in a subtle but menacing gesture. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, but his body language screamed intimidation. Inside the neighboring houses, curtains shifted. People were watching, whispering, but no one dared come out. One woman gasped softly from her window. A man, 2 doors down, pulled out his phone but didn't dial, just recorded quietly from a distance. David felt the weight of eyes on him, but also the heavy silence of inaction. No one would step in. No one would help. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. These weren't real HOA officers. Real officers didn't behave like this, so aggressive, so unprofessional. Their badges looked fake, their tone too forceful. Everything about them reeked of a setup. Yet here they stood, crowding his porch, demanding he abandon the very place he had built his life around. David's heart began to pound. His mind raced with questions. Who were these men really? Why were they targeting him? Was this some elaborate scam, or something worse? He held his ground, his voice calm but firm. "I've lived here for over a decade. I've followed every rule, paid every fee. You're not real HOA officers, and you have no right to be on my property." The tallest man smirked, leaning closer. "We'll see about that. Hand over your keys, or this gets a lot harder." The words weren't just a demand. They were a threat. David's grip tightened around his coffee cup. His blood ran cold, but he refused to step back. Something told him this was only the beginning. The morning that started with coffee and quiet would not end the same way. A storm was coming, and David knew he had to be ready for it. The silence on the porch grew heavier with every passing second. David stood tall, refusing to move, but the three men didn't flinch. Their fake authority filled the air like a storm cloud pressing down on him, making the morning feel colder than it should. The tallest man, clearly the leader, snatched the flimsy paper back from David's hand and tapped it with his finger. "This is all the proof you need. You violate HOA property codes. Either you leave now, or we escalate this situation." David's jaw tightened. "Escalate? You've shown me nothing official. No case number, no stamp, no letterhead. You think I don't know my rights?" The other two exchanged looks, uneasy for a moment, but their leader pushed forward. "We don't have time to argue with you. You've already been warned multiple times. This is your final notice." That was a lie, and David knew it. He had never received a single warning. In fact, he had a folder inside with every HOA letter and receipt neatly filed. These men weren't enforcing rules. They were bluffing, hoping intimidation would do the job. But the way they leaned in, their voices sharp and booming, told David something more sinister. They weren't just here to scare him. They wanted him out, immediately. From the corner of his eye, David noticed movement, curtains shifting, a phone camera peeking through glass. His neighbors were watching everything unfold. Some whispered to each other from behind cracked windows. Others simply stared in silence. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody opened a door. It was as if the whole street had turned into a silent theater, with David trapped on the stage. "Sir," one of the fake officers snapped, "hand us your house keys. Do it now, and we won't have to use force." David's pulse quickened. His mind replayed the words over and over. Use force. These weren't words HOA officials ever used. He studied their faces more closely now. Their haircuts were too sharp, their postures too rigid. These weren't community workers. They looked like men used to intimidation, maybe even hired muscle. And that raised the question, who had sent them? "Listen carefully," David said, his voice steady even though his heart raced. "This is my home. You have no legal authority here. If you think otherwise, you'll need to come back with real officers and real paperwork." The men shifted uncomfortably. Their act was slipping, but the leader wasn't ready to give up. He stepped closer, invading David's space, his shadow falling across the porch. "You don't want to test us. People who test us regret it." The words slithered into David's ears like poison. He clenched his fists by his sides, forcing himself not to react. He had been in tense situations before. Years ago, in his military days, he had faced far worse. But this was different. This was his home, his sanctuary, and they were threatening to rip it away. One of the men shifted his stance, glancing toward the driveway as if checking for witnesses. Another kept his eyes locked on David, waiting for a sign of weakness. They weren't official, but they were coordinated. This wasn't a random visit. It was planned. David exhaled slowly, his mind turning. He couldn't call them out in front of the whole neighborhood just yet. If he pushed too hard, they might escalate to violence. But if he showed fear, they would win. He decided on a middle path. "Fine," David said coolly. "Wait here. I'll get the documents from inside. You'll see I'm not in violation of anything." The leader narrowed his eyes but nodded. "Make it quick." As David turned toward the door, he caught sight of his neighbor across the street. Mrs. Kelly, an older woman who often brought him cookies, stood frozen behind her curtain. Her eyes met his for a fleeting second. She wanted to help, he could see it, but fear pinned her in place. Like everyone else on the block, she was terrified of being the next target. Inside his home, David closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger. He knew one thing with certainty. These men were not legitimate. They weren't here for the HOA. They were here for him. He walked quickly to the living room, pulling out his phone. He didn't call the police, not yet. Something told him these men had connections, maybe even someone inside the local system. Instead, he scrolled to a different number. A number he hadn't used in years, but one that still burned in his memory. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. A deep voice answered on the second ring. "David? It's been a while." David's tone was low but urgent. "I need help. Some men are at my house, pretending to be the HOA. They're trying to force me out." There was a pause, followed by the sound of an engine roaring in the background. "Say no more. We're on our way." David ended the call and looked back, toward the porch, through the blinds. The three men were still there, pacing, growing impatient. They had no idea what was coming, and for the first time since the confrontation began, David felt a flicker of relief. Reinforcements were on their way. The storm wasn't over, but now he wouldn't be facing it alone. On the porch, the three men shifted impatiently, their fake authority cracking as the minutes dragged on. The leader wrapped his clipboard against his palm, glaring at David's front door. "What's taking him so long?" one muttered. "He's stalling," another replied. "Maybe calling the cops." The leader smirked. "Good, we'll deal with them too. By the time anyone sorts this out, he'll be gone." Inside the house, David watched from behind the blinds, heart steadying with each breath. He had faced intimidation before, on foreign soil in combat zones far away from this quiet street. But there was something more chilling about being cornered at home, in the very place that was supposed to be untouchable. He had made the call. His brothers were on their way, but he knew it would take time for them to arrive. Until then, he had to hold firm. The leader suddenly banged on the door, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. "Johnson, time's up! Hand over the keys or we'll let ourselves in!" David opened the door slowly, stepping back onto the porch. His expression was calm, but his voice carried steel. "You're not getting my keys, and you're not setting foot inside this house." The men bristled. One took a step forward, towering over him. "You're making a mistake." "No," David said firmly. "The mistake is yours. You think you can walk into a man's home with fake uniforms and fake papers and he'll fold. Not here. Not today." The neighbors leaned closer to their windows, tension pressing down on the street. Phones were now out in full view, red recording lights blinking from several houses. The impostors noticed, and unease flickered in their eyes. But their leader waved a dismissive hand. "Let them record. By the time this is over, none of it will matter." David narrowed his eyes. That single sentence confirmed what he suspected. This wasn't about HOA violations at all. This was a targeted move. These men were here for him. But why? Before he could answer his own question, one of the men lunged forward, snatching at his arm. David jerked back, heart pounding, and raised his voice so the entire street could hear. "Get your hands off me! You have no authority here!" The words rang out like a warning bell. Neighbors gasped. Someone shouted, "Call the police!" The men froze, realizing the crowd around them, though silent, was growing restless. The illusion of control they had carried onto the street was beginning to crack. The leader clenched his jaw, forcing a smile. "All right, Johnson. You want to play tough? We'll wait. But don't think you're safe. We'll get what we came for." David held his ground, eyes unflinching. "I've dealt with tougher men than you. You picked the wrong house." The three exchanged uneasy glances, retreating a step down the porch. They weren't giving up, but their swagger wasn't, as sharp as before. And then, faint at first but growing louder, came the low rumble of engines. David's heart lifted. The sound was unmistakable. heavy tires rolling on asphalt, controlled and deliberate. His brothers were near. The impostors glanced toward the corner of the street, confusion flashing across their faces. A black SUV and 2 trucks turned slowly onto the block. They weren't speeding. They weren't reckless. They moved with purpose, gliding into view like predators entering a field. The street grew silent. Neighbors who had been whispering fell completely still, eyes darting between the impostors on the porch and the vehicles now approaching. The 3 men stiffened. Their leader tried to mask it with a grin, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. David stayed silent, his eyes never leaving theirs. The SUV rolled to a stop in front of his driveway. Doors opened in unison and 6 men stepped out. They weren't in uniform, but they didn't need to be. Their movements alone carried the weight of discipline. Their gazes were sharp, scanning the scene with quiet precision. One of them, broad-shouldered, calm, unmistakably in command, locked eyes with David and gave the faintest nod. Relief surged through David's chest. His brothers had arrived. The impostors weren't smiling anymore. The SEALs walked forward, not rushing, not shouting, just moving with the kind of quiet confidence that turned heads and silenced rooms. Neighbors gasped softly, phones lifting higher, recording every step. The leader of the fake officers swallowed hard, his hand tightening on the clipboard. His voice, once booming, came out thinner now. Who are they?" David folded his arms, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Friends, and trust me, you don't want to test them." For the first time that morning, the power on the street shifted. The men who had stormed in with arrogance now stood frozen, shadows of fear creeping across their faces, and the storm that had begun on David's porch was about to break wide open. The morning air felt heavy, charged with invisible electricity as the 6 men advanced toward David's porch. They didn't shout, didn't threaten. Their silence was louder than any command the fake officers had barked earlier. Each step they took was measured, steady, and deliberate. The kind of walk only men trained in discipline could pull off. Tucker, leader of the impostors, swallowed hard, his cocky grin faltering. He turned his head slightly toward his partners, but their confidence was draining fast. They weren't prepared for this. They expected David to cave under pressure, maybe shout or panic. What they hadn't expected was 6 former Navy SEALs, arriving like shadows from his past. The street had gone completely still. Neighbors who had hidden behind curtains were now leaning against windows and porches, their phones raised, capturing every second. The quiet suburb had become a stage, and the impostors stood frozen in the spotlight. One of the SEALs, a tall man with piercing eyes and a voice like gravel, finally spoke. His words were calm, almost too calm. "Gentlemen, identification." "Now." The impostors hesitated, glancing at each other. Their leader forced a laugh, trying to salvage control. "We already showed the homeowner our paperwork. This is an HOA business. None of your concern." But the SEAL didn't even blink. He took one slow step forward, shoulders squared, gaze unwavering. "Paperwork? Show it again." The leader fumbled, with his clipboard holding up the flimsy sheet of paper. His hand shook slightly, betraying his nerves. The SEAL didn't even bother to take it. He gave a short, sharp chuckle. "That's not paperwork. That's a bad printout. Try again." The impostors stiffened, their charade crumbling piece by piece under the weight of men who had stared down far worse enemies. David's heart pounded as he watched, but he stood tall, refusing to let the impostors see his fear. For the first time, since the confrontation began, the power was no longer on their side. The leader's mask slipped. His voice cracked as he snapped back. "You think you can interfere in official matters? This man is in violation. He's being evicted today. End of story." The SEAL commander tilted his head slightly, his tone icy. "End of story? No. The story's just starting." and I suggest you choose your next words carefully." The impostors shifted uneasily. Their leader took a step back, then forward again, trapped between backing down and keeping face. His pride told him to push harder, but his instincts screamed that he was outmatched. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. "They don't look real. Those aren't HOA officers. Look at the difference." Every recording phone caught the trembling in the impostors' hands, the cracks in their voices. The once fearsome figures now looked cornered, like predators realizing they had wandered into the wrong den. Then came the breaking moment. The leader, desperate to reclaim control, lunged forward and jabbed a finger into David's chest. "If you don't hand over those keys, we'll drag you out ourselves." Before the sentence could finish, one of the SEALs moved. It wasn't violent, it wasn't aggressive, it was precise. He stepped in, placing a strong hand on the impostor's wrist and twisting it just enough to stop the jab. His voice was calm, but sharp as steel. "Touch him again, and you'll regret it." The street gasped. The leader yanked his hand back, his face pale. He hadn't expected resistance, not like this, not from men who radiated unshakable confidence. David's breath caught. For the first time that morning, he felt safe. Truly safe. His brothers had stepped between him and danger, just as they had in the past. The impostors stumbled back a step, their facade shattering completely. The leader tried to regain his voice, but it came out weak, cracking under pressure. You can't just step in. We'll call backup." The SEAL commander gave a humorless smile. "Good idea. Let's call the real police. Let's have them check your badges, your papers, and your story. How about we do that?" The impostors froze. That was the last thing they wanted. The neighbors, emboldened now, began murmuring loudly, "Yes, call the police! Let's see them explain themselves. This doesn't look official at all." The weight of the crowd was turning. The impostors weren't feared anymore. They were exposed. David stepped forward, voice steady, carrying further than it ever had. "These men came to my house, tried to evict me with fake papers, and threatened me on my own porch. I want every neighbor here to see what happens when someone abuses fear. This ends today." The crowd murmured approval. Heads nodded. Phones captured every word. The impostors were cornered, their swagger gone. They looked like children caught in a lie, too, big to cover. Their leader opened his mouth, then shut it again, his eyes darting toward the street where escape suddenly looked like the only option. But escape was impossible. 6 SEALs stood between them and freedom. The breaking point had arrived. The porch was silent except for the heavy breaths of the 3 impostors, their fake bravado collapsing under the weight of 6 calm but unyielding SEALs. The entire street seemed frozen in anticipation, every neighbor holding their phones steady, waiting for the next move. The SEAL commander didn't blink. "Here's your chance. You can explain yourselves now, or you can explain it in a police interrogation room. Which will it be?" The impostors hesitated. Their leader's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His earlier threats were gone. He knew the crowd wasn't on his side anymore, and these men standing in front of him weren't people he could scare. Finally, one of the younger impostors cracked. His voice shook as he muttered, We weren't here on official business. We were sent." The leader whipped his head toward him, hissing, "Shut up!" But it was too late. The damage was done. Every camera was recording. The neighbors gasped, leaning in closer, whispering furiously. "Sent? By who?" The SEAL commander's voice stayed even, calm as a still lake, but his words carried a sharp edge. "Who sent you?" The younger man swallowed hard, his eyes darting. From the commander to David. His lips trembled. It was someone from the HOA board. They told us to scare him, to make him leave." The leader's face twisted with fury, but his silence only confirmed the truth. David's chest tightened. The HOA? The very organization that was supposed to protect the integrity of the neighborhood, the group that collected fees and enforced standards. They were behind this? Why me? David asked, his voice low but steady. The younger man's eyes dropped. They said you were a problem. You asked too many questions. You pushed back too often. They wanted you gone so they could take the house. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Neighbors who had once complained about minor HOA issues now realized the scale of corruption behind the curtain. This wasn't about lawn height or mailbox colors. This was about power and greed. David clenched his fists, forcing his anger to stay controlled. He thought back to the last HOA meeting he attended. He had questioned the sudden rise in fees, asked for transparency and where the money went. He had stood firm when others stayed silent. And now it all made sense. They wanted to silence him, to make an example of him, by sending impostors to drive him out of his own home. The SEAL commander stepped closer to the young man, his voice softer now. You were hired to intimidate him. But why go this far? Why threaten eviction? The young man's answer came in a whisper. They promised us money, said no one would question it, said the neighbors would stay quiet. They told us he lived, alone, that he wouldn't fight back. Every head on the street turned toward David. The neighbors' faces, once pale with fear, now burned with anger. Fear had kept them silent, but hearing the truth shifted something deep inside. This wasn't just David's fight anymore, it was everyone's. The leader of the impostors finally snapped, his voice breaking into a roar. Enough! You don't know what you're talking about. We were just enforcing the rules. But even as he shouted, his eyes betrayed him. He knew the charade was over. One of the SEALs chuckled dryly. Rules? You mean intimidation? Threatening a homeowner on his own porch with fake papers? That's not enforcement. That's a crime. The leader fell silent, sweat beading on his forehead. David stepped forward, his voice carrying across the street. So that's it. They wanted me gone because I refused to stay quiet. They thought fear would do the job. He looked directly at the impostors, then at the neighbors. But fear only works when good people stay silent. The crowd murmured in agreement. Someone shouted, We all knew something was wrong. Another voice called, They've been hiding things for years. The neighborhood, once divided by fear of the HOA, was beginning to find its voice. David looked back at the SEALs, his brothers standing like a wall of strength behind him. Relief coursed through him, but so did resolve. This doesn't end here. They sent you, but the people truly responsible are still sitting comfortably thinking they got away with it. That ends today. The SEAL commander gave a single nod. Then we'll make sure it ends. The impostors, pale and trembling, were no longer the predators they had pretended to be. They were pawns, caught in the spotlight, exposed for what they truly were. And as sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder with every second, David knew the moment of reckoning was only just beginning. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, echoing down the quiet suburban streets. Red and blue lights soon bounced off the rooftops, casting long shadows across David's lawn. The impostors shifted nervously, their fake authority stripped away, and for the first time they looked exactly what they were: criminals caught in the act. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of the house. Doors opened quickly, and uniformed officers stepped out with firm expressions. Their hands hovered near their holsters, not in aggression, but in readiness. They were already aware that something unusual had gone down. The SEAL commander raised his hands slightly, stepping forward. Officers, situations under control. These men tried to impersonate HOA officials and threaten a homeowner with illegal eviction. One officer approached, eyes narrowing at the impostors. Step forward, slowly, hands where I can see them. Leader of the fake enforcers opened his mouth, searching for words. This is a misunderstanding. We were just Save it. The officer cut him off sharply. We've already received 3 calls from neighbors reporting fake badges and intimidation. You're done. The impostors exchanged panicked glances, their confidence completely shattered. The officer signaled, and within moments they were being cuffed against the hood of the patrol car, their fake documents and badges bagged as evidence. The neighbors cheered softly under their breath, their fear replaced with relief. Some clapped, quietly. Others recorded the entire arrest on their phones. For the first time in years, the community felt like the truth was finally being dragged into the light. David exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. He turned to the SEAL commander. If they really were working for the HOA board, this isn't just about me, it's about every family here. The commander nodded, his sharp eyes glinting in the flashing lights. Then it's time to take this further. Tonight wasn't just intimidation. This was an attempted crime against a homeowner, a violation of rights. That board thinks they can act above the law. The crowd, emboldened, began to murmur in agreement. A woman stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. They've been draining us for years. Fees keep going up, but nothing ever changes. New projects appear, but no receipts, no transparency. Another neighbor added. We've all been afraid to speak out. Every time someone questions them, suddenly they're fined, threatened, or shamed at meetings. The SEAL commander turned toward the gathering. Then it's time you stop being afraid. You've just seen what courage looks like. David stood alone when no one else would. But together, you're stronger than any corrupt board. David looked out over the faces of his neighbors, people he had waved to at mailboxes, shared holiday greetings with, and borrowed tools from. For years, fear had silenced them. But now, with the impostors in handcuffs and the truth spilling out, the silence was cracking. The officer in charge approached David. We'll take these men in for processing, but if what they said about the HOA board is true, this could open up a serious investigation. Do you have evidence? David hesitated. Not directly, but I've noticed the patterns. Money disappearing, sudden rule changes, threats that don't line up with official bylaws. I've kept copies of every letter, every notice. The officer gave a short nod. Then hold on to those. It might be the key to unraveling this mess. The SEAL commander placed a steady hand on David's shoulder. You won't face this alone, not anymore. As the patrol cars pulled away with the impostors inside, the neighborhood felt different. The air was lighter, charged with something. New unity. Neighbors stepped closer to David, no longer whispering from behind curtains. They asked questions, offered support, even thanked him for standing up when they hadn't. But David knew this was only the beginning. The HOA board hadn't expected their scheme to unravel so quickly. And once they realized the impostors had been caught, they might try to cover their tracks or tighten their grip even further. One of the SEALs broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. The board's been hiding behind fake rules and intimidation. That ends now. If they think they can bully this neighborhood, they're about to find out what happens when the people push back. The commander looked at David. The next move is yours. Do you want to fight this through the system? Or do you want to confront them directly? David's heart pounded. He thought of the nights he lay awake worrying about fees, the letters shoved into his mailbox with vague threats, the neighbors too afraid to attend meetings. He thought of the imposters trying to take his home today. His answer came without hesitation. We confront them, face to face. The whole neighborhood deserves to hear the truth, and the board deserves to answer for it. The SEAL commanders, lips curved into a knowing smile. Then we'll stand with you. And this time, they won't be hiding behind fake authority. The neighbors nodded, some with nervous smiles, others with growing determination. Tonight, the battle had shifted. David wasn't just defending his own house anymore. He was leading a community ready to reclaim its voice. And the board, still unaware their plan had crumbled, was about to meet the storm they had created. The neighborhood had never been this alive before. For years, people walked in silence, nodding politely but never truly connecting, too afraid of the HOA's shadow. But tonight, it was different. Families gathered in clusters on sidewalks, murmuring with anticipation. Word had spread quickly. David was going to the HOA board meeting and he wasn't going alone. The community center's parking lot was full, more cars than anyone had ever seen for an HOA meeting. People who hadn't attended in years showed up. Some clutching folders of old notices and fee slips, others simply wanting to see what would happen. And standing at the front of the crowd was David. He wasn't alone this time. On either side of him were the Navy SEALs, their calm but unshakable presence making it clear he wasn't walking into this battle unprotected. Behind them were dozens of neighbors, no longer hiding behind curtains but ready to stand together. As David walked toward the building, whispers followed him like ripples. Some were nervous, others hopeful, but all eyes were on him. Inside, the HOA board sat at its usual long table. The president, a sharp-faced man named Charles Whitmore, tapped a gavel impatiently. He scanned the packed room, clearly unsettled by the turnout. Normally, only a handful showed up. Tonight, the hall was overflowing. "Order!" Charles snapped, his voice louder than necessary. "This is a scheduled meeting of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. We will address routine business. Anyone disrupting will be removed." David stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying weight. "We're not here for routine business, Charles. We're here for answers." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. The board members shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between each other. Charles smirked, though his voice carried an edge of strain. "And who appointed you the spokesman of this circus?" David didn't flinch. "No one had to appoint me. I'm a homeowner, just like every single person here, and we're tired of being intimidated, lied to, and silenced." Gasps and nods rippled through the crowd. A few people clapped quietly. One of the SEALs stepped forward, holding up a folder. Earlier today, 3 men impersonating HOA enforcement officers tried to illegally evict David from his home. They carried fake badges and forged documents. They're now in police custody. A shocked wave spread across the room. Charles's face paled slightly, but he tried to mask it with a sneer. "That's ridiculous. We don't know anything about that." But David was ready. He pulled out a stack of letters, notices, and photographs. "Then explain this. The notices you sent? Me don't match the official bylaws. Fees have been raised without proper approval. Fines have been invented out of nowhere. And when I asked questions, I was threatened." He handed the papers to the front row, neighbors passing them down like evidence in a trial. The crowd leaned forward, scanning the pages, nodding grimly as they recognized similar patterns in their own experiences. "This isn't just about me," David continued, his voice rising with strength. "This board has been draining us, hiding behind rules we never agreed to, and using fear to keep us quiet. Well, not anymore." The room erupted into applause. Neighbors stood up, waving their own documents, letters, fines, unexplained charges. The air was charged with years of pent-up frustration, finally finding its release. Charles slammed the gavel again, his composure slipping. "This is out of order. The board has full authority." "No," the SEAL commander cut in, his voice commanding. "You don't have authority. The law does, and the law doesn't recognize intimidation, forgery, or fraud." The officers who had arrested the impostors earlier entered the room quietly but firmly, their presence undeniable. One officer raised his voice. "We've launched an official investigation. The men we arrested claimed they were acting under instructions from the HOA board. We'll be reviewing financial records, meeting minutes, and correspondence." The board froze, faces drained of color. Charles tried one last desperate defense. "You can't do this. The HOA is private. You have no right." "Wrong," the officer said firmly. "Fraud, forgery, and threats cross into criminal territory, and the state takes that seriously. The crowd cheered, louder this time, as relief swept over them. Years of fear were unraveling before their eyes. David stepped closer to the board table, his voice steady but fierce. For years you thought you could bully us. You thought we'd stay quiet. But look around you. He gestured to the packed room. Neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, united in purpose. We're done being afraid. This community belongs to the people who live in it, not to a corrupt board hiding behind fake power. One by one, neighbors stood up to share their own stories. A single mother described being fined for leaving toys in her yard. An elderly couple revealed unexplained maintenance fees that never fixed anything. Every testimony added weight, every voice breaking the chains of silence that had bound them for so long. The SEALs remained watchful, silent guardians as the people poured out their truth. Finally, Charles's shoulders slumped, his arrogance gone. He muttered, "You don't understand how much work it takes to run this place." David's eyes locked on his. "Then you should have led with honesty. Instead, you chose greed. And tonight, it ends." The officers stepped forward. "Charles, Whitmore, you're under investigation for fraud, forgery, and abuse of power. You and several board members will need to come with us." Gasps filled the room as Charles and two other board members were escorted out, their authority crumbling. Before everyone's eyes, the silence that followed was broken by thunderous applause. Neighbors clapped, cheered, and even embraced one another. For the first time in years, they felt free. David looked around the room, humbled. This was never about me alone. This was about all of us, and tonight proved something important. When good people stand together, corruption doesn't stand a chance. The SEAL commander placed a hand on his shoulder. You stood your ground when no one else would. That's real leadership. And now this community can rebuild the right way. In the days that followed, the HOA was restructured. A new board was elected, made up of everyday neighbors who promised transparency, fairness, and honesty. Fees were reviewed, rules clarified, and most importantly, voices were heard. David became a quiet hero, though he never claimed the title. He went back to his garden, his porch swing, and his peaceful mornings. But the neighborhood was different now, stronger, united, no longer ruled by fear. And whenever someone passed his house, they waved not just out of politeness, but with gratitude. Because one man had stood up when it mattered most, and with the help of 6 SEALs and a community ready for change, he turned fear into freedom. The storm had passed, and what remained was a neighborhood reborn.